We left last time with Deng Xiaoping making his much anticipated trip to the US in January of 1979. However, what we didn't discuss was that in the same month, Deng claimed sovereignty over Taiwan, which was no real surprise, but then also Hong Kong. And at that point in world history, it really looked as though it would only be a matter of time until Taiwan was reunified with the mainland under the rule of Deng himself. Even the US ambassador to China, Leonard Woodcock, conceded that it was likely a matter of time, and Deng's move to unify Taiwan was not unprecedented. In 1682, a Qing emperor took over Taiwan from a ruler of the Ming dynasty. At a session of Chinese Congress, Deng declared that if Taiwan's Chiang Ching-kuo yielded the mainland to China, that China would then respect his authority over the island. Chiang refused, and there was more bad news for Deng Xiaoping. Having normalised relations with the states under the presidency of Carter, his friend's tenure looked to be over. Deng Xiaoping was to now deal with an administration that was much less supportive of moving away from Taiwan, the Reagan administration.
We do not have inflation because, as President Carter says, we have lived too well. We have inflation in great measure because the federal government has lived too well.
Hello there.
So as always, make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all things modern China. Just last month, Australia, the US and the UK signed the AUKUS deal in an effort to contain China, and so as the risk of conflict looks more imminent, this really is one of the most important topics we can be studying. So before Reagan even won the election in 1980, the US Congress took steps towards watering down the negotiations that began under Carter. If you watched our last episode, you'd remember that Carter negotiated with Deng Xiaoping in secrecy, and Congress was largely left out of the 1978 talks. Many congressmen and women across both parties were annoyed that they'd been left out of the talks, and many in Congress had their campaigns significantly funded by Taiwanese affiliates or weapons manufacturers who sold to Taiwan. In 1979, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which mandated that America supply weapons to Taiwan for self-defense purposes. It's also important to remember that Taiwan was under martial law and was far from democratic. So the US argument for supporting them was more out of long-term loyalty than any of the modern pro-democratic arguments we see today. Nonetheless, Deng was furious and protested against the act. This pretty much ruled out any chance that Deng had for reunifying the two Chinas in his lifetime, and so he was understandably quite frustrated. Now, by 1980, Reagan was not yet president. However, he was hot on the campaign trail, and it was pretty well known that he'd wrap it up. Carter was perceived as being too soft on his foreign policy, and so Reagan campaigned on a tougher Cold War policy and re-strengthening America's ties with Taiwan. He sloganed on treating Taiwan with dignity, including the resumption of formal relations. Reagan's vice presidential running mate and the former ambassador to China and then later the president of the United States, George Bush Sr., flew to China to reassure Deng that Reagan would not pursue a two-China policy. However, literally while Bush was meeting with Deng in the Middle Kingdom, back at home Reagan gave a press conference saying that Taiwan was a nation and that America would supply it with whatever it needed to defend itself.
Yeah. No, I mean, no.
Right. Your first answer was yeah, wasn't it?
I meant no.
Obviously, Reagan did indeed go on to win the election, and China's US ambassador Chai Zemin threatened to not attend the inauguration if a Taiwanese ambassador was also in attendance. To China's relief, there was no Taiwanese ambassador present, and so China began to believe that they could still make some progress with the Reagan regime. China proposed a 9-point plan for reunification, including Taiwan retaining its own army and that private companies and property could remain. But, once again, Chiang Ching-kuo rebuffed Deng Xiaoping, and Deng threatened to hit the nuke button and break relations with the US if they gave any more credence to Taiwanese independence. In response, Reagan sought the counsel of Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, who considered that Taiwan probably didn't need FX-15 jets to defend itself. China's Foreign Minister, Huang Hua, also put pressure on America to give a specific date whereby they would cap their weapon supply to the same limit of Carter's. He even went one step further and proposed that they make a plan to phase out weapon supply altogether to zero. Now, America rejected the second clause, but did actually agree to limit their supply to that of Carter's earlier. It's hard to understate how seriously China took weapon supply to Taiwan, as it was seen as giving them legitimacy. For example, the Netherlands lost their status of having normalized relations with China because they sold 2 submarines to Taiwan.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are 2 of them.
But, nonetheless, the US-China agreement was formalized with the US-China joint communique, and Reagan even made a 6-day visit in 1984. For the second half of the 80s, relations between the two remained relatively stable, up until Tiananmen Square in 1989. Now, even though the focus of this mini-series is on the Sino-US relationship, given that the Anglosphere is playing a collective role in containing China today, I will devote a minute or two to Hong Kong. Now, we've obviously established how deeply Deng Xiaoping cared about the Taiwan issue, but he was also really invested in Hong Kong, but not so much Macau though. Now, this was really different to Mao Zedong, who was never too occupied with anything off the mainland. Deng resented the unequal treaties of the 19th century and wanted to rewrite China's century of shame. In 1979, nominal leader Hua Guofeng went to Britain to press the Chinese case for control of Hong Kong. At this point, it was a touchy issue. If China took control and governed it according to Maoism, they'd have an instant revolt. Deng Xiaoping was cool with letting them have their own economic system, but he couldn't alienate conservative Maoists within the party at this point. However, in December of 1980, Mao's successor Hua Guofeng was ousted from the party, and Deng had enough capital within the party to press the case for Chinese control over Hong Kong. He advocated for the one country, two systems policy, and Thatcher visited China in 1982 to discuss the issue. Britain's 150-year lease was due to end in 1997, and so Deng made it clear that China intended to take control at the end of the lease. However, Thatcher interpreted this as merely a starting offer in the negotiations to barter for something else.
Do you like your driveway and sidewalk shoveled for $8,000?
Oh, well, I certainly could use some little snow shovelers, but $8,000 seems a little steep. How about $10?
She didn't realise that Deng was merely stating what China was going to do, and nothing productive happened at the meeting. As she left, she fell down the stairs, prompting many to make rumours that she was shaken by her meeting with Deng. Thatcher made the argument that British expertise was needed in Hong Kong, but Deng said if they couldn't reach an agreement, he'd announced that China was unilaterally taking it over. When Thatcher left China, the Hong Kong stock market fell 25%, and the negotiations went something like this.
A jackal! Jackal! It's a jackal! It looks like a jackal! 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 It's a jackal! Jackal!
Time!
It wasn't right the first time you said it. Why the hell would it be right the next 10 times?
Except, eventually, it actually worked for China. After 22 rounds of negotiations, China and Britain signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which agreed a peaceful changeover from Britain to Hong Kong in 1997. And really, it's just been smooth sailing ever since. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Next time we'll be looking at America's response to the Tiananmen Square massacre, and we can't wait to see you next time for our next venture into a fascinating part of history.